Dopamine is the molecule of motivation. I mean, for years and years, people thought dopamine was about pleasure, but dopamine is mainly about craving and motivation and drive. There's a simple experiment that illustrates that. Pick 2 rats, you give them a lever they can press, and they can get food out of that lever, heat if their cage is cold, including a mate to mate with if they press this lever. Both rats press the lever just fine. Now you take away dopamine from one of those rats. What you find is that both rats or both people still experience pleasure from food, from sex, from warmth when they're cold, from cool when they're too warm, etc. However, if you take that rat, both rats, and you move them 1 rat length away from the lever, so they have to just do a little bit of work in order to press the lever. Or you take a human who has no dopamine neurons or very little dopamine, and you make the pleasureful thing a little bit more challenging to get to. The ones with no dopamine do not pursue pleasure at all. That's just one example of what now are hundreds of examples in the neuroscience literature showing that dopamine is the molecule of pursuit, craving, motivation, drive, pick your favorite word. If your dopamine is depleted, you will feel not motivated. Now, there's a double-edged sword here because many things, as you mentioned accurately, trigger dopamine release. Seeing a positive comment, a compliment, food, the more palatable a food, a really tasty chip compared to a slice of a potato that's baked but doesn't have anything on it, one truly releases more dopamine than the other. I could list off a number of things, but we have a baseline level of dopamine. Nicotine, for instance, increases that by about 50%. Cocaine, 100% increase, a doubling. Methamphetamine, 1,000. But what happens after that big dopamine increase is that the baseline levels of dopamine go below what they were before. How low that drop is below baseline is proportional to how big the increase was before. Well, and that's why if you're getting lots of little dopamine hits from things, as we call them, you're going to feel kind of depressed, and those things don't feel as rewarding anymore. Okay, now eventually the system can reset if you don't indulge. Let me give an example. This is a true story example. In talking about dopamine, someone I know has a child. The kid is in his 20s. He was a decent student, excellent athlete, really charming, nice kid. I've known him since he was little. And he reached a point where his friends had graduated high school. He went to community college and he kind of fizzed out of that. He wasn't into that. This resonated with my earlier story. He was working a job, but then he wasn't feeling like working. And he was convinced he had ADHD and he was depressed. And he started taking off down the path of medication, which, by the way, have helped many, many people. Most of the medications for ADHD, by the way, are drugs that increase dopamine. Because dopamine increases focus, it increases motivation, and it increases drive, essentially, the willingness to get into action in pursuit of goals, just like the rats that have dopamine or the humans that have dopamine pursue, the ones that have depleted dopamine do not. So this guy, who is a real story, was struggling in a major way. So about 3 months ago, he was watching a lot of videos online. He was texting a lot. He was mainly playing video games. But he wasn't really enjoying them as much anymore. And one thing you see with people with ADHD is they actually can focus if they're really interested in something. Why? Because their dopamine levels are elevated and they're able to focus. He heard about the dopamine system and Anna's work, and I talked to him, and he decided to do what some people call a dopamine fast, but for him that meant no video games, and he did 2 weeks of no screens, which at first I think was agonizing for him.
Oh my gosh.
It's now 3 months later. It's a little less than 3 months later. I actually talked to his parent today, working full time, off all ADHD meds. He's very focused on his work. He's excited by things, and he allows himself a short period of time each day where he plays video games and he enjoys them again like never before. There is a simple explanation for this, which is that his dopamine system is reset. When you're constantly pursuing things, eating highly palatable foods, engaging in very stimulating any behavior that's very stimulating, there's a drop below baseline, and it takes an increasingly great stimulus, high threshold stimulus, in order to excite you. So if people are feeling bored, unmotivated, unstimulated, most of the time it's because they are overindulging in things that keep pounding this dopamine system, but the baseline of dopamine is going down. Now there are a few hacks that can actually help, and Anna talks about some of these in her book. The main thing is if someone is engaging in any truly addictive behavior or substance, or a behavior that just doesn't feel like it's that great, but you're finding yourself doing it compulsively, if you allow yourself 4 hours a day on social media, you'll probably find that you're scrolling, you're not even sure what you're looking for. And what you're looking for is something that jolt that baseline. So you want to limit those behaviors, or in some cases, if it gets really severe like it was for this individual, you want to eliminate.
Completely.
Ideally, it's 30 days. Now, this is the same prescriptive that they give alcoholics, heroin addicts, etc. But some of those drugs, of course, have actual withdrawal symptoms that can be problematic. Cannabis, for instance, is pretty in prominent use, and a lot of people, the idea of 30 days without that is, I think they probably say they could do it, but it would be very challenging for them. And I'm not here to tell people what to do, right? Then there's about drugs, alcohol, or anything, but the idea is 30 days of no interaction with that thing, person, behavior, all sorts of things, so that you can enjoy other things. I like to say, Addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. And if I may, enlightenment is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure.
Right.